Imagine you're walking home. You're just completely exhausted, right?
But yeah, just drained to the bone after a long day.
Exactly.
Oh.
So you pause on a bridge to catch your breath, you look up, and suddenly the sky isn't blue. It's not even like a normal sunset orange anymore.
Right.
It is the color of raw meat. The clouds look like literal tongues of fire, just, licking across the horizon.
It is terrifying.
It really is. Would you think you were just looking at a pretty sunset, or would you feel like deep in your gut that the world was actually ending?
I mean, honestly, most people would feel an intense primitive jolt of adrenaline. You would feel your nervous system just totally hijack your brain.
Yeah.
It would be convinced that some catastrophic threat was unfolding right in front of you.
And that is exactly where we are starting today. Today's mission is to explore how a single bizarre painting from 1893 became the ultimate, the universal symbol for human anxiety.
It really is the ultimate symbol.
It is. And we are pulling our insights today from this deeply illuminating article by Anita Louise Hummel from Anita Louise Art. It's titled, "The Story of Edvard Munch's The Scream, a Symbol of Modern Anxiety."
It's a fantastic piece. Really dives into the history.
Okay, let's unpack this. Most people know the image, right? You, the listener, you've definitely seen the swirling sky, the hands clamped onto the sides of the face.
The mouth stretched open in that silent howl.
Yes, that terrifying howl. But very few people actually know the intense, true story behind it. So our goal today is to look past the pop culture parodies, past the Halloween masks and the internet memes.
Right, the stuff we see everywhere.
Exactly. We want to understand what this masterpiece actually reveals about the human soul.
And to really grasp that, we cannot look at this painting as just a clever concept. It wasn't something the artist Edvard Munch just brainstormed in a cozy studio one afternoon.
No, not at all.
It was a documented physical experience. It was a completely visceral reaction to a specific moment in time.
And I want to plunge right into that moment before we even touch on his broader life story, because the way he describes the inciting incident is just so raw.
It's remarkably detailed. I mean, in his own diary, Munch described the exact inspiration for the scream.
What did he say exactly?
Well, he wrote that he was walking along a road with two friends while the sun was setting. And he explicitly noted his physical state. He said he was feeling exhausted, leaning toward illness.
Just totally depleted.
Exactly. And suddenly, he says, the sky turned blood red. He paused, leaned on a fence, and saw what he described as blood and tongues of fire hovering above the city and the fjord below.
Wow, and here is the detail that gets me every single time. His friends just kept walking.
They just kept walking. They didn't even notice.
Unbelievable.
But Munch stood there, paralyzed, just trembling with anxiety. And he wrote that in that moment, he sensed, quote, an infinite scream passing through nature.
Oh, that description gives me chills. Because honestly, it sounds identical to the mechanics of a modern-day panic attack.
Yeah.
Or like an episode of severe sensory overload.
It really does line up perfectly with that.
Right. When you are in the middle of a panic attack, your body floods with cortisol and adrenaline. Your vision tunnels. Your heart is hammering against your ribs.
You're completely frozen.
Frozen in terror.
Yeah.
Just overwhelmed by your own internal alarm bells. And the most isolating part of that experience is exactly what Munch described. The rest of the world just keeps going.
Yeah, life just goes on around you.
Right. His two friends, casually strolling down the road, they represent the oblivious world. They have no idea that, for him, reality is completely falling apart. It's an incredibly relatable feeling for anyone who has ever dealt with intense anxiety.
What's fascinating here is that this diary entry proves the painting isn't just a depiction of someone having a bad day or, feeling a little stressed at work.
Yeah, it's way deeper than that.
It's a profound physiological response to the overwhelming, indifferent forces of nature and existence. I mean, when you look at the painting, the landscape isn't static.
It's totally alive.
Right. It is rippling, swirling, and distorting all around that central figure. That visual distortion is mirroring internal psychological turmoil.
Munch is basically showing us that the world literally warps when you are in the grip of that kind of terror.
Exactly. The environment itself becomes an active participant in your panic.
But, a sensory overload like that doesn't just happen in a vacuum. It requires a nervous system that is already primed for terror. So why was Munch so uniquely susceptible to this intense existential dread?
It's a great question.
I mean, A lot of people can watch a dramatic sunset without feeling an infinite scream passing through the universe, right?
True. Well, to understand his baseline psychology, we really have to look at the environment that built him. Edvard Munch was born in 1863 in Norway.
Okay.
And his early years were fundamentally defined by just this atmosphere of illness and unrelenting tragedy.
It's honestly heartbreaking to read through the source material. He lost his mother to tuberculosis when he was just 5 years old.
Just a little kid.
Yeah. And if losing a parent at that age wasn't enough, his beloved older sister, Sophie, died of the exact same disease when she was only 14.
You really have to picture the reality of tuberculosis in a 19th century household. It wasn't a sudden, peaceful passing.
No, it was brutal.
It was known as consumption because it literally consumed the patient over months or even years. It was a highly visible, physically agonizing decline. We're talking severe coughing, wasting away, hemorrhaging.
Good. And witnessing that, not just once, but twice, at such a formative age, that has to leave a permanent scar on a child's psyche.
Absolutely.
And the surviving family dynamics only compounded that trauma, right? I mean, his father wasn't exactly a comforting figure.
Immensely. So his father was a military doctor, but also a deeply, intensely religious man who really struggled to cope with these devastating losses.
Right.
His way of managing grief was to lean heavily into religious fundamentalism. He would often read his children vivid, terrifying descriptions of hell and eternal damnation.
Wow. So you've got grief, death, and now hellfire being preached to you.
Exactly. Combine that heavy, unresolved grief with Munch's own fragile health, because he was frequently sick himself, and he spent these long, claustrophobic Norwegian winters confined indoors.
That is just a recipe for profound isolation.
It really is.
There's a quote from Munch in the source that feels so heavy to me. He wrote, "Illness, madness, and death were the black angels that kept watch over my cradle."
It's such a chilling metaphor, but it perfectly encapsulates how his brain was wired from birth. Those black angels completely altered his trajectory in life.
How so?
Well, his father initially pushed him into engineering in Christiania, which is what Oslo was called back then.
Yeah, right.
But the internal weight he carried made the precise mathematical world of engineering just impossible for him. He couldn't do it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So he abandoned his studies to pursue art, enrolling at the Royal School of Art and Design. He was desperately seeking an outlet for all his internal chaos.
I hear that, but honestly, I'm going to push back and play devil's advocate for a second.
Sure, go for it.
Half of Europe had tuberculosis in the 1860s. Infant mortality was crazy high, and death was everywhere. Practically everyone had lost someone close to them.
That's very true.
So why didn't every single artist from that era paint melting skies and screaming aliens?
Yeah.
What was so different about Munch's brain that made his grief translate so radically onto a canvas?
That is a phenomenal question, and it really represents the crucial pivot point in his entire career. You're completely right. Tragedy was common.
Right.
But the expression of that tragedy was constrained by the artistic rules of the time. The dominant movement in the late 19th century was realism.
Oh, okay. So making things look exactly like they do in real life.
Exactly. Realism was all about painting accurate, objective representations of the world. If a realist painted a bridge, it looked exactly like the physical bridge. They painted the wood grain, the rivets, the water below.
So total visual accuracy.
But Munch realized that traditional realism was completely inadequate for his needs. I mean, you cannot paint a pretty realistic landscape and convey the feeling of those black angels watching over you.
Right. A physically accurate painting of a sunset doesn't show the viewer what a panic attack actually feels like.
Exactly. So he had to break the rules.
He had to find a new way.
He gravitated toward the symbolist movement. Symbolism was basically a rebellion against realism. It prioritized emotional expression and psychological depth over visual accuracy.
So it gave artists permission to paint the invisible, essentially.
Yes. For Munch, this was the ultimate breakthrough. It allowed him to paint what he felt rather than just what he saw.
That makes total sense. Because his unique, compounded trauma required a completely non-traditional method of expression. He needed radical mediums for radical emotions.
Very well put.
Which leads us perfectly to the physical creation of the scream itself.
Right. So the Scream is part of a larger, really ambitious series he called The Frieze of Life. This series explored universal themes of love, anxiety, and mortality.
Okay.
But when you look closely at the physical composition of the Scream, it wasn't just a standard oil painting on a pristine, stretched canvas. He actually used tempera and pastels on cardboard.
Cardboard.
Yeah, cardboard. And he didn't just make one version either. He obsessively returned to the subject, creating 2 paintings, 2 pastels, and multiple lithographs.
The detail about using cardboard absolutely blows my mind. I mean, when you think of classical art, you think of oil on canvas, right?
Sure, that's the standard.
And oil takes time. It's slow. It requires deliberate layering. It takes weeks to dry. It's a very controlled medium. But using pastels on a piece of cardboard, it's like grabbing a napkin at a coffee shop to frantically scribble down a brilliant, urgent idea before it escapes your brain.
That urgency is precisely the point.
Yeah.
If you understand the mechanics of painting on cardboard, the choice becomes brilliant.
How so?
Well, cardboard is unprimed and highly porous. It literally sucks the binder right out of the paint. Because of that, the finish doesn't have the luminous, polished glaze of traditional oil paintings.
Oh, it dries it out.
Exactly. It leaves a chalky, raw, unvarnished texture. It lacks any sort of protective sheen, making the scene look dry, harsh, and almost abrasive to the eye.
Because a polished, glossy canvas would completely ruin the panic of the piece.
Precisely. It heightens the chaos. The bold strokes of red, orange, and blue in that swirling sky aren't carefully blended. They are frantic. They convey a real sense of violence.
Yeah, you can feel the energy in the strokes.
By aggressively rubbing pastel into cheap cardboard, he broke away from everything polite and conventional in the art world to create a purely subjective, unfiltered vision.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Let's talk about the central figure, the screamer.
Ah, yeah.
A critical detail highlighted in our source is that the screaming figure is entirely ambiguous.
Yeah.
It doesn't look like Edvard Munch. It's neither male nor female. It's neither young nor old.
It doesn't even have hair or distinct clothing.
Right. It hardly even looks human. It looks almost alien, or like a ghostly skull wrapped in skin.
And that ambiguity is the absolute secret to the painting's enduring genius. Think about it. If Munch had painted a detailed, realistic portrait of a specific 19th century Norwegian man with a mustache and a top hat, standing on a bridge and screaming,
people would just look at it and say, oh, look at that specific man. He seems to be having a terrible time.
exactly. It would be an observation of someone else's pain.
It creates distance between the viewer and the subject.
Yes. But by stripping away all identifying characteristics, the figure loses its specific identity and becomes a universal vessel. It becomes a blank psychological mirror.
Oh, I love that phrase, a blank psychological mirror.
It allows you, the person looking at the painting, to project your own face, your own modern anxieties, and your own deeply buried fears onto that figure. You don't just observe the panic, you step into it.
And because anyone can project themselves onto that figure, the painting managed to escape its own century entirely. It became a universal symbol. I mean, it's essentially the most successful visual meme in human history.
It really is. It's adaptable to the anxieties of literally any era.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to look at what was happening in society when this was painted in 1893. The world at the turn of the 20th century was undergoing massive, rapid transformation.
Unprecedented change. The Industrial Revolution had completely upended daily life. You had rapid urbanization, with people crowding into dirty, noisy cities.
Yeah, factories everywhere.
Factories, trains moving faster than horses, the introduction of electricity. Traditional structures and religious values were being heavily challenged by scientific progress.
The pace of life was just accelerating at a terrifying speed.
And the human brain simply hadn't evolved to process that level of constant stimulation. There's a profound collective unease that the world was changing too quickly, and the individual was utterly powerless to stop it.
Which sounds exactly like the conversations you and I are having today.
It really does.
Just swap out steam engines and telegraphs for artificial intelligence, the 247 global news cycle, and the constant barrage of smartphone notifications.
The parallels are striking.
We are dealing with the exact same societal pressures. The sheer exhaustion of doom scrolling through global tragedies while trying to manage your own life, it creates that exact same sense of powerlessness.
Absolutely.
Looking at the screen today is essentially the 1893 equivalent of wanting to hurl your smartphone into the ocean and cover your ears.
It is the exact same psychological mechanism, just a different technological trigger. Psychologists and philosophers actually frequently cite the scream as the ultimate visual representation of existential anxiety.
Really? Like formally?
Oh, yeah. The central figure alone on a bridge, overwhelmed by the environment, facing a vast and indifferent universe, it actually prefigured the entire philosophical movement of existentialism that would dominate the 20th century.
Wow.
The profound alienation, the dread, the search for meaning in a chaotic world. Munch captured all of that on a cheap piece of cardboard decades before philosophers like Sartre or Camus fully articulated it in text.
That's incredible. And its cultural footprint is just staggering when you really map it out. Think about its journey through pop culture.
It's everywhere.
It directly inspired the killer's ghost face mask and the horror franchise Scream, which links the painting's imagery straight into the themes of modern slasher film terror.
Right.
But then you look at the news, and it's heavily used by political activists. People protesting climate change or anti-war demonstrators, they literally paint their faces like the figure or hold up massive banners of the Scream.
They use it because it instantly conveys a desperate, urgent warning. It screams, "Pay attention, the world is quite literally on fire."
Yes. But beyond the pop culture parodies and the political utility of the image, the source material makes a really vital point about its deeply personal therapeutic value. Discussing the Scream today opens up a necessary dialogue about mental health and emotional vulnerability.
Which is incredibly important. Anxiety is such a pervasive yet isolating issue right now. The pressures of modern work, social media, economic uncertainty, it leaves so many people feeling fundamentally broken and alone.
Yeah, and that is where Munch's bravery comes into play. By choosing to confront his own deepest fears and putting his raw panic on display so publicly, he challenged the immense stigma surrounding mental illness.
He really did. He shows us that struggling with depression, anxiety, or sensory overload is not a personal failure or a weakness.
Right?
Okay.
It is a profoundly shared, universal human experience. By acknowledging the Scream within ourselves, we can actually begin to address our distress rather than burying it. Suffering, when expressed and shared, can be transformed into something incredibly meaningful.
It's deeply ironic, though. As the painting's emotional and cultural values skyrocketed over the decades, its physical form, that porous, fragile cardboard, became this massive target. It became incredibly physically vulnerable.
The fame of the image transformed the physical object into a magnet for high-stakes art heists. And because he painted multiple versions, there were multiple targets out there.
The details of these heists are unbelievable. It's almost like scenes from a Hollywood movie.
Oh, they are wild.
In 1994, one version of the painting was stolen from the National Gallery in Oslo, and the thieves timed it with, insulting perfection.
They really rubbed it in. They executed the heist on the exact opening day of the 1994 Winter Olympics in Lillehammer. While the entire country's security forces and media were distracted by the opening ceremonies, two men simply propped a ladder up against a window of the gallery,
Just a ladder.
smashed the glass, climbed inside, and cut the painting down. The whole thing took about 50 seconds.
50 seconds to steal a masterpiece.
And they even had the audacity to leave a postcard behind that read, "Thanks for the poor security."
It's astonishing brazenness.
It really is. That version was thankfully recovered a few months later in an undercover sting operation. But then, a decade later in 2004, it happened again.
And this time it was much worse.
Yeah, much more brutal. Another version of the Scream was stolen by armed robbers in ski masks in broad daylight right out of the Munch Museum. The museum was full of terrified visitors.
Just awful.
They ripped the Scream and another famous Munch painting, Madonna, right off the walls and fled in a stolen station wagon.
This raises an important question about the preservation of history. Because while the paintings from the 2004 armed heist were eventually recovered 2 years later, they didn't escape unscathed.
They were damaged, right?
Yes. The pieces suffered physical damage. Tears, watermarks, and friction damage from being poorly handled by criminals. It really highlights the immense, almost overwhelming responsibility that curators and historians face in protecting fragile cultural heritage.
It's a huge burden.
Think about it. This fragile piece of cardboard holds immense psychological weight for the collective human psyche. Yet its physical reality is so delicate. It can be torn, it can be degraded by acid, it can be ripped off a wall by a thief with a gun.
It honestly parallels the human condition itself.
Oh, definitely.
We are psychologically vulnerable to the massive forces around us, and our physical bodies are incredibly fragile too.
That is a very apt way to look at it. The physical vulnerability of the painting perfectly mirrors the emotional vulnerability of the figure it depicts. It's a fragile thing existing in a chaotic, often violent world.
So what does this all mean for us today? We've talked about deep childhood trauma, devastating disease, armed art theft, and the crushing weight of existential dread.
We've covered a lot of heavy ground.
We really have. But when you really absorb the source from Anita Louise' art, the scream is ultimately presented as a symbol of hope.
As strange as that sounds.
Right. I know that might sound entirely counterintuitive for a painting about a massive panic attack.
Yeah.
But by bravely expressing his own agonizing internal anguish, Edvard Munch created a bridge of empathy across centuries.
He really did.
When you stand before that painting, or even just look at a digital print of it on your screen, you are powerfully reminded that you aren't alone in the chaos of modern life. Someone else felt this exact same overwhelming terror over a century ago.
They felt the world was too loud, too fast, and too indifferent.
Exactly. And they survived it by turning that raw terror into profound art.
It is a profound testament to resilience. But before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over.
Oh, I love these. Lay it on us.
Let's think about the real-world science behind that blood-red sky. In 1883, just a decade before Munch painted The Scream, the Krakatoa volcano erupted in Indonesia.
Okay, Krakatoa.
It was one of the most violent geological events in recorded history. It launched millions of tons of ash and aerosol particles deep into the Earth's stratosphere.
Wow.
And for years after that eruption, those particles scattered sunlight and caused incredibly vivid blood-red twilights all across Europe, including Norway.
Wait, so the sky actually did look like it was on fire?
Yes. Scientists and astronomers of the era heavily documented these terrifying, unnatural sunsets. So while we've been talking about Munch's internal psychological panic, we have to ask, what if that moment on the bridge wasn't entirely a hallucination?
Oh, wow.
What if his underlying trauma was suddenly triggered by a very real, scientifically verifiable atmospheric anomaly that truly made the sky look like the apocalypse had arrived?
That is wild.
And if you couple that with Munch's own diary quote, where he explicitly said he felt an infinite scream passing through nature, it changes the entire perspective of the painting.
How do you mean?
Well, we always assume the central figure is the one screaming. But what if it isn't? What if the mouth is open in silent shock and the hands are clamped tightly over the ears because the figure is desperately trying to block out the deafening existential shriek of the universe itself?
Wow. Blocking out the scream of the universe rather than making it. That completely changes how I will ever look at those hands over the years. It's not a scream, it's a shield.
Exactly.
Well, if you enjoyed exploring this with us today, we'd love for you to join our community. Please subscribe to our podcast and our YouTube channel so you never miss a deep dive. Also, make sure to sign up for our newsletter and check out our blog for even more great information and insights. We can't wait to see you there.